On Earth, there are homes built in places with no flat ground to stand on, clinging to cliff faces or resting on isolated rock pillars. In some places, getting home does not begin with a door, but with climbing near vertical rock walls or using unstable access paths like rope ladders. Some communities live at high altitudes, where thin air and low temperatures make everyday activities require more energy than usual. Meanwhile, other structures exist on elevated rock formations or steep terrain, completely separated from the ground with no conventional access routes. In other regions, people must adapt to prolonged freezing conditions or constant drought, where water and food are consistently limited. And now, let's explore the most dangerous homes on the planet, where the location alone is already a true test of survival. Bivaco Bufa de Pereiro is often described as the loneliest house in the world, a title that reflects how the structure nearly disappears into a sheer Dolomites cliff, revealing only a small facade suspended in mid-air. The shelter is embedded inside a natural rock cavity, surrounded on all sides by vertical stone walls, with no conventional walking path leading to it, making it resemble a hidden doorway carved into the mountain. After decades of abandonment and roof collapse caused by avalanches and alpine storms, the site was fully restored in 2022 by Italy's 6th Alpini Regiment as an emergency refuge for mountaineers. Inside, the space is extremely compact, with raw mountain rock forming the walls, fitted only with 12 simple wooden bunk beds and no electricity, running water, or toilet facilities. Reaching the shelter requires advanced climbing skills, including navigating iron ladders bolted directly into vertical rock faces and narrow exposed ledges. Along the route, climbers must cross the 27-meter Cristallo suspension bridge hanging over a deep abyss, famously featured in the film Cliffhanger, turning access to this refuge into a genuine survival challenge. Longyearbyen is identified as one of the fastest warming Arctic settlements, with temperature increases several times higher than the global average, destabilizing permafrost and triggering landslides and avalanches in areas once considered secure. As frozen ground that remained intact for thousands of years begins to thaw, infrastructure requires reinforcement or relocation to prevent subsidence and structural collapse. The Svalbard archipelago hosts roughly 3,000 polar bears compared to about 2,400 residents, which is why anyone leaving town limits must carry a high-caliber rifle and know how to operate it for self-defense. Persistent permafrost prevents natural decomposition, so critically ill or terminal patients are transported to mainland Norway for burial procedures. No native trees grow in the region, and the terrain consists primarily of exposed rock, ice, moss, lichens, and low-ground vegetation. Under the Svalbard Treaty, citizens from any country may reside and work without a visa if they prove financial independence and housing, while the settlement simultaneously experiences 4 months of polar night and 4 months of continuous daylight each year. Cliffside Capsule is recognized as the world's first cliff-hanging capsule accommodation, opening in the year 2013 and pioneering the global trend of sleeping suspended on vertical rock faces. To reach their sleeping pod, guests must climb a via ferrata system of steel rungs and cables drilled directly into the cliff, ascending for roughly 1.5 to 2 hours with no intermediate exit points. There is no elevator or staircase for departure, as the standard way to leave the site is by sliding down a network of 6 zip-line routes that carry the body in controlled freefall across the canyon. Inside the glass capsule, the dry toilet is visually exposed, allowing an unobstructed view straight down hundreds of feet into the abyss during a basic human routine. The most frequent visitors outside the bedroom window are not people, but massive Andean condors gliding at eye level along the cliff wall. Cliffside Capsule is among the rare places where extreme adventure travel and full comfort lodging are structurally fused, forcing survival instinct and luxury to coexist in a single suspended space. Korowai tree houses represent the highest form of everyday human housing ever built. The Korowai people construct their homes on tree trunks, rising from about 20 to 40 feet, with extreme examples reaching heights of roughly 115 to 165 feet above the forest floor. Elevating the house serves not only to avoid wild animals and flooding, but primarily to protect families from malevolent spirits known as kakua, and from nighttime attacks by rival tribes. Each structure is built entirely from forest materials such as wood, bamboo, and sago palm leaves, blending into the environment and resembling massive bird nests growing directly from the trees. The only access is a single notched tree trunk used as a ladder, requiring residents to climb at extreme heights without any safety equipment. Despite the danger, indoor fire pits are built using clay and insulating layers for cooking and warmth, where a fire at around 130 feet leaves virtually no escape other than fatal descent or burning with the house. Refuge des Cosmiques hut was built in the 1930s not for climbers, but as a high-altitude physics laboratory dedicated to the study of cosmic rays. Today, reaching the hut from the Aiguille du Midi cable car requires crossing a razor-thin, snowy ridge where a single misstep can mean a fall of several thousand feet into the glacier abyss. The rapid ascent from about 3,300 feet to nearly 12,500 feet in only 20 minutes creates a serious risk of acute altitude sickness, with cases of cerebral or pulmonary edema occurring directly at the hut. The structure stands on solid rock while being surrounded by permanent snowfields and slowly flowing glaciers that constantly reshape the landscape year after year. Despite the thin air and lethal environment, the refuge functions like an improbable high-altitude hotel, serving hot European meals, draft beer, and even offering double bedrooms. Beneath the modern building, remnants of the original laboratory remain, and the French National Center for Scientific Research still operates atmospheric monitoring instruments at this extreme location. Katsky Pillar is a natural limestone monolith rising about 131 feet above the forested landscape of Georgia, crowned by one of the most isolated and dangerous monasteries ever occupied. From a distance, the structure appears as a tiny dot, suspended in mid-air, surrounded by sheer 90-degree rock faces with no protective barriers above the abyss. The only access route is a vertical iron ladder measuring roughly 131 feet, often called the Stairway to Heaven, presenting an extreme physical and psychological challenge. On a summit surface of only about 1,600 square feet, monks constructed a small church, a hermit cell, and a wine cellar dating back to the 9th century. For more than 20 years, the pillar was home to what was described as the world's most isolated monk, with all daily supplies hauled up by a primitive pulley system from the base. Since 2018, a decree by the Georgian Patriarch has prohibited visitors from climbing the pillar, allowing access only to male monks, while women have always been completely forbidden. The Drina River House is often described as the loneliest house in the world, standing alone on the top of a narrow rock in the middle of the violent Drina River. Despite its fragile appearance, the small wooden structure has survived for decades against strong currents and frequent floods. It was not built by professional engineers or architects, but constructed in the year 1968 by a group of local youths who wanted a place to rest while swimming. Over more than 50 years, the house has been swept away or severely damaged by floods around 7 times, yet each time it was rebuilt by locals on the exact same rock. To adapt to the powerful river flow, the house features open gaps beneath the floor, allowing floodwater to pass through instead of pushing against the entire structure. Although it is not an ancient monument, this persistence has turned the house into a modern cultural symbol that attracts thousands of visitors every year. Wangxian Valley did not originate as a natural wonder, but as an abandoned granite quarry where severe environmental destruction left behind exposed cliffs and deep industrial scars. The entire valley visible today is the result of a large-scale artificial reconstruction, transforming a hazardous industrial wound into a cliff-based architectural landscape. Hanging houses are built more than 360 feet above the ground on smooth granite walls, directly anchored to the cliff and designed in traditional Jiangxi style, with rammed earth walls, dark tiled roofs, and wooden windows. Viewed from below, the structures appear unstable, creating the constant illusion that they could detach and fall at any moment. The most extreme zone is Baihe Cliff, where hotels and homestays are positioned right at the edge of a deep abyss, allowing guests to sleep suspended above empty space. A narrow pathway, measuring about 1,270 feet, is fixed to the vertical rock face, with one side opening to a sheer drop of nearly 330 feet, pushing human balance and nerve control to their limits. Saint-Michel d'Aiguille is regarded as the most spectacular chapel in France, defined by a rare fusion of extreme volcanic geology and refined medieval architecture. The structure sits atop an extinct volcanic plug, rising about 269 feet, surrounded on all sides by sheer cliffs, resembling a stone needle thrust into the sky. Its facade is built from alternating white, red, and black stones arranged into precise geometric patterns, reflecting Byzantine and Moorish influences adapted to early European design. Constructed in the 10th century, the chapel was forced to curve tightly along the narrow summit, turning the building itself into a direct extension of the surrounding abyss. The only access route consists of 268 steps carved directly into the rock, forming an ascent that tests endurance and mental control as much as physical ability. Despite its isolation, the site serves as the sacred starting point of the Via Podiensis pilgrimage route, marking the beginning of a journey of faith through a demanding natural landscape. Bonifacio cliff houses are among the few places in the world where medieval buildings stand directly on the edge of sheer limestone cliffs above the Mediterranean Sea. Centuries of wave erosion have undercut the cliff base, causing the upper edge where houses sit to project outward into open air, creating a striking sense of instability. Access includes the King of Aragon stairway, with 187 steps carved straight into the near vertical limestone, linked by legend to a single night excavation in 1420, though historically built to reach fresh water. Inside the citadel, many historic houses lack ground-level doors, as residents once climbed ladders to upper floors and pulled them up at night for defense. The Bastion de l'Étendard is the highest fortress in France, constructed in the 13th century with fortified underground chambers carved directly into the rock to guard the harbor entrance. Meteora is a rare monastery complex in the world, built atop massive sandstone pillars that rise like stone fingers from the vast Thessaly plain. Nearly 20 monasteries stand directly on cliff edges, at heights reaching up to about 1,970 feet, where a single misstep can mean falling straight into the deep valley below. To construct them, medieval monks spent decades carrying individual bricks and buckets of mortar on their backs while climbing nearly vertical rope ladders set at close to 90 degrees. For centuries, the only way in or out was a rope net lowered from the summit, and the rope was replaced only when it finally snapped. Living at elevations of roughly 1,300 feet meant complete isolation from groundwater, forcing the monasteries to rely on large rainwater cisterns for survival. The most prominent site is Great Meteoron, the largest and oldest monastery, which still preserves priceless relics and the bones of monks who lived and died on these cliffs. Vardia is a vast monastery complex and cave city from the 12th century in Georgia, often described as a hidden city with a structure reaching 13 levels and thousands of rooms carved into the cliff. Far beyond a normal settlement, this massive cliff dwelling was created as an absolute survival fortress, capable of concealing tens of thousands of people from sight and from Mongol invasions and massacres. To survive at extreme heights, residents transformed the mountain interior into a sealed honeycomb-like system containing bakeries, storage rooms, and a complex underground water network rarely seen in medieval architecture. The safety of Vadzia once relied on secret passages and steep tunnels cut through rock, where a single misstep could send someone falling into the deep gorge of the Metkvari River Valley. In the year 1283, a powerful earthquake tore open the cliff face, collapsing roughly 2/3 of the city and exposing rooms as open-air caves suspended against the sky. To this day, a small group of monks continues to live here, sleeping in rock chambers, praying, and sustaining life on this cliff for more than 800 years. Casa do Penedo is often described as one of the strangest houses on Earth, built by wedging the structure directly between 4 massive granite boulders. Inside, the layout follows the natural rock formations, featuring a eucalyptus wood sofa weighing about 772 pounds, with stairways and railings carved to fit the stone precisely. There are no artificial gardens surrounding the house, only wild grass, scattered rocks, and open sky, creating a sense of total isolation from the modern world. Because of its remote location and unwanted attention, the owner installed bullet-resistant windows and reinforced steel frames to protect the building. Despite sitting next to a large wind farm, the house has no connection to the power grid and relies entirely on candlelight for illumination. As visitor numbers increased, the owner stopped living here full-time, and part of the house was converted into a small museum. Uplistiki is one of the oldest cave cities in the Caucasus region, a massive rock-carved wonder cut directly into sandstone cliffs more than 3,000 years ago. Instead of using conventional stone construction, ancient inhabitants challenged geological limits by carving deep into the mountain to create palaces, homes, and temples with tall, self-supporting stone ceilings. To survive isolation and potential siege, a steep secret tunnel was excavated through the mountain, down into the gorge, to access water without exposing the settlement. Some large chambers were carved with such refinement that local tradition believes they once served as the residence of Queen Tamar in Georgian history. Danger also came from within, as powerful earthquakes throughout history collapsed solid rock chambers, turning homes into deadly traps, falling toward the river below. Even more unusual, archaeologists uncovered wine cellars carved directly into the rock floor, revealing a culture that preserved pride and indulgence while living on some of the most exposed and dangerous cliffs in the region. St. George Monastery is not built on level ground, but clings directly to the vertical cliffs of Wadi Kelt, forming a clearly defined 3-tier structure suspended between sky and abyss. The highest level contains the cave of the prophet Elijah, a natural grotto described in the Bible as Elijah's refuge, where ravens brought him food, serving as the spiritual foundation of the monastery. The middle tier holds the main churches and bell tower, while the lower level contains storage rooms and ancient crypts, where the stacked skulls of 14 monks massacred by Persian forces in the year 614 remain on display. Wadi Kelt below is extremely dangerous during the rainy season, as sudden flash floods can surge from higher ground and sweep through the canyon without warning. Many scholars and pilgrims identify this gorge as the biblical Valley of the Shadow of Death, where darkness rapidly engulfs the narrow terrain at sunset. Beyond summer desert, temperatures exceeding 104 degrees Fahrenheit and severe dehydration risks, access to the monastery also involves security uncertainty due to its location within the politically tense West Bank. For local fishermen, the monastery remains not just a tourist site, but a sacred place where prayers are offered for safe journeys at sea. Paro Taksang is the highest spiritual symbol of Bhutan and is considered one of the most impossible architectural structures in the world, clinging to a sheer granite cliff at an elevation of 10,236 feet. Built without modern machinery or technology, the monastery was constructed entirely by human effort, with every stone and timber carried by hand along narrow mountain paths beside deep drop-offs. The entire complex is anchored to a cliff, plunging more than 2,950 feet, creating a spatial layout so steep that simply looking at it can induce vertigo. The monastery consists of 4 main temples and 8 caves, some of which are so narrow that only one person can pass through at a time to enter for worship. In the year 1998, a major fire nearly destroyed the monastery, and due to its isolated cliffside location, firefighters were completely unable to reach it. The successful restoration of the monastery in its original position by the Bhutanese people in 2005 stands as a rare testament to human endurance and the ability to reclaim life in extreme terrain. Dunka village served as the capital of the Kingdom of Spiti during the 17th century, before political power shifted to Khaza. The village is perched on a steep cliff within the Spiti Valley, isolated by extreme cold and rugged terrain that create prolonged silence throughout the year. From its elevated position, the confluence of the Spiti River and the Pin River is clearly visible, marking a key geographic junction of the region. The surrounding landscape is barren and eroded, dominated by exposed earth pillars and fractured rock with minimal vegetation. About 1 hour of steep hiking above the village lies Dunka Lake, a sacred freshwater lake whose color shifts with changing light and sky conditions. Dunka Monastery preserves a rare 4-faced Vairochana statue oriented toward 4 directions, while the entire settlement rests on unstable clay and loose scree that geologists identify as highly vulnerable to collapse. Debre Damo is the oldest continuously active monastery in Ethiopia since the 6th century, isolated entirely atop a flat-topped mountain with sheer vertical cliffs that are nearly inaccessible. Its main structure represents one of the last surviving examples of Aksumite architecture, using the monkey head technique where wooden beams pass through stone walls to provide flexibility against strong winds and centuries of erosion. In an arid and isolated landscape, monks carved rainwater cisterns directly into the rock and farmed on extremely limited surface areas to sustain a fully self-sufficient way of life. The only way to reach the monastery requires climbers to secure a leather rope around their waist while gripping another rope by hand as a monk above pulls them up the cliff. This single climbing rope is made entirely from braided cowhide and has become smooth and slippery over time due to the sweat of thousands of hands. Debre Damo is also one of the very few places on Earth that strictly forbids the presence of females, including female animals, to preserve absolute spiritual purity for the monks. A Maasai village represents a settlement model where defensive fencing forms a direct survival barrier between humans and large predators in East Africa. Each enkang is arranged in a closed circular layout and enclosed by dense acacia branches with long hardened thorns, creating a living perimeter that separates sleeping quarters from lions, leopards, and hyenas roaming nearby at night. At the center lies an open livestock enclosure where cattle, goats, and sheep are gathered every evening because herds function as the primary economic and cultural foundation of the community. The traditional Manyatta houses are dome-shaped and constructed by women using mud, clay, wooden branches, and fresh cow dung, forming compact shelters while also sustaining conditions favorable for flies, Anopheles mosquitoes, and endemic grassland diseases. Positioned along wildlife migration corridors between Serengeti and Masai Mara, residents remain in constant vigilance to defend livestock against nocturnal predator attacks. Despite rapid urbanization and tourism growth in Kenya, numerous Maasai communities continue to preserve the circular village structure, high-jumping initiation rituals, and seasonal semi-nomadic herding patterns across generations. Kandavan is one of the steepest inhabited settlements in the world, where daily movement requires climbing narrow stone steps carved into a mountainside. The village remains a rare rock-dwelling community, continuously inhabited for more than 700 years, with about 117 households living inside volcanic formations, known locally as Karan. Instead of constructing conventional houses, residents excavate living spaces directly into the rock cores, creating walls up to about 6 feet thick that provide insulation and structural stability. The stone cones rise like a natural amphitheater, typically reaching 2 to 4 stories, with some formations extending to nearly 130 feet in height. Winters last close to 6 months, and heavy snowfall frequently turns pathways into icy slides that can temporarily isolate the settlement. Kandavan also features a hotel carved into volcanic rock and small exterior niches illuminated at night with oil lamps, forming a natural lighting network along the cliff face. Mount Fanjing is consistently ranked among the most dangerous religious sites on Earth because its sacred structures stand on isolated stone pillars at extreme altitude. Reaching the summit on foot requires climbing nearly 8,000 888 consecutive stone steps, demanding hours of continuous ascent with no safe resting zones. The final approach to Golden Summit is almost completely vertical, forcing climbers to use both hands and feet while gripping iron chains fixed into the cliff, where a single slip can result in fatal consequences. At the top, two separate rock columns support temples dedicated to Shakyamuni Buddha and Maitreya Buddha, connected only by a narrow stone bridge suspended over a deep abyss. Because the peak rises alone above surrounding lowlands, it is frequently struck by violent winds and lightning, making access strictly forbidden during storms or unstable weather. Weather conditions shift abruptly, with clear skies turning into dense fog within minutes and reducing visibility to under 16 feet, turning every wet stone step along the cliff into a life-threatening hazard. Jiangnan Hanging Temple is one of the very few structures on Earth that appears to have been suspended in mid-air for more than 700 years. Its main halls and shrines sit hundreds of feet above the ground, with half of the structure carved into the cliff, while the other half projects directly over a deep abyss. Instead of resting on foundations, the temple's weight is supported by slender wooden pillars anchored into the vertical rock using ancient mortise and tenon techniques, allowing it to withstand storms and earthquakes for centuries. The entire structure is attached to a massive rock formation, shaped like the Buddha, creating the illusion that the temple grows directly from the mountain itself. Access requires walking along narrow wooden plank paths pressed against the cliff, where the line between safety and freefall is only a few hand widths apart. Today, a glass bridge spans part of the cliff, letting visitors look straight down into the void and merging ancient architecture with modern extreme tourism. Phoktal Monastery Living Quarters is regarded as the most isolated monastic settlement in the Zanskar region, where monastic life exists beyond any conventional idea of accessibility. The monastery clings directly to a vertical limestone cliff inside a narrow gorge, overlooking the fast-flowing Emerald Zarap River and creating a suspended zone of survival between rock and water. The living quarters are not separate buildings, but a network of small earthen and wooden rooms carved and reinforced within the mountain itself to withstand cold winds and constant erosion. Phoktal is one of the very few monasteries in Ladakh with no vehicle access at all, requiring journeys on foot or by horse and mule along narrow and slippery trails where a single misstep can mean a fall hundreds of feet into the gorge below. All food and supplies for roughly 70 to 100 monks are carried in manually during summer, while winter forces them onto the frozen surface of the Zanskar River in the perilous Chadrak route. In February 2025, a major rockfall severely damaged the prayer hall and storage areas, exposing how the monastery's existence constantly balances between spiritual isolation and mortal danger. Choqquequirau is one of the most isolated and inaccessible ancient cities ever built by humans. The settlement sits on a mountain ridge with sheer cliffs overlooking the deep Apurimac Canyon, leaving it almost completely cut off from the surrounding world. surrounded by permanent snow-capped peaks and dense tropical forest. Choqquequirao exists in a suspended environment where deep chasms and extreme terrain block nearly all access routes. Its strangest feature is a vast system of stone terraces carved directly into mountain slopes approaching 60 degrees, where ancient builders embedded white llama figures into stone walls running along cliff edges. Houses and temples have remained standing for more than 500 years, despite earthquakes and severe erosion in the Andes Mountains, revealing extraordinary construction skill. Reached only by narrow trails clinging to cliffs, the site once served as a final refuge for Inca royalty, effectively untouchable to enemies. Even today, only about 30% of the site has been explored, while the remaining 70%, including hundreds of structures, remains swallowed by jungle and locked onto unreachable rock faces. Abuna Ye Matagu is considered the most dangerous church in the world, carved entirely by hand into a vertical sandstone pillar at an elevation of more than 8,200 feet above sea level. To reach its doorway, visitors must climb a sheer rock face using bare hands, without safety ropes or protective equipment of any kind. The church stands isolated atop a natural stone tower, accessible only through narrow footholds just wide enough for toes, worn smooth by more than 15 centuries of continuous use. Directly before the entrance lies a ledge less than about 1.5 feet wide, where the boundary between life and a drop of roughly 820 feet below is separated by a single misstep. The church preserves heavy and priceless ancient manuscripts handwritten on goat skin, raising unanswered questions about how such objects were carried to this height centuries ago. Beside the entrance, small cliffside niches hold the remains of monks who served here for generations, living and dying on the rock itself, forming a continuous spiritual presence suspended among the clouds. Maijishan Grottos is regarded as the largest clay sculpture complex in the East, featuring more than 7,000 relief statues modeled entirely from compacted earth inside hanging caves. The caves are not carved at ground level, but scattered across a sheer cliff face at heights ranging from roughly 100 to over 260 feet, making access inherently hazardous. Construction legends describe how ancient craftsmen stacked massive wooden scaffolds from the mountain base upward, dismantling each level as work progressed, giving rise to the story known as cutting wood downward. Today, the only access route is a suspended walkway system anchored directly into near-vertical rock walls, where visitors move along narrow paths with open abyss immediately below. Several stair segments connecting cave tiers rise at almost vertical angles, forcing climbers to rely entirely on handrails to maintain balance. The mountain consists of fragile purple-red sandstone prone to erosion and collapse, a geological condition that prevented stone carving and made clay modeling the only viable method for preserving the statues.